Hi friends, this is Joe. This is episode number 148 of the Dekahedron RPG podcast, and today we are talking about healing. So originally I was going to be addressing a comment from Sam in my YouTube comments who talked about the magic system, and that led into a conversation about downtime, and this was going to be an episode about downtime, but I noticed that Daniel Norton over at the Bandit's Keep had just done an episode on YouTube on downtime a couple weeks ago, and I didn't want to step on his coattails. So I am going to talk about one narrow aspect of what I was going to talk about, and that is healing. And this is really aimed at old school games, even though this is no longer OSR October, but I also use it in newer games. I can't take credit for anything I'm going to say here. This is kind of an amalgamation of ideas that I picked up along the years, but not very many. There's really two sources of this. The first source, going chronologically, is Judges Guild Ready Reference Sheets, DM's Ready Reference Sheets. I don't know this particular... So if you didn't know, the Ready Reference Sheets was really just a collection of the... Judges Guild journal that they just combined and threw in there with very little editing or anything. Actually, no editing, because mostly it was just copying the very same pages. You know, this is in the days before word processors and everything. So, yeah. But I wasn't able to find the original article. I have the big reprint of the Judges Guild journal. The second source is an article by John M. Ford that appeared in Role Player number 16 back in October of 1989. Role Player was Steve Jackson's newsletter. It wasn't even a magazine. You got it for free. I don't think I subscribed. I didn't pay for it. You got it for free if you bought GURPS and you sent back a little card. And a lot of it was just, here's our errata, but every so often there would be, not about every issue in the end at least, there'd be other articles. And John M. Ford, he wrote some GURPS books, he wrote some Star Trek books, both game books and like Star Trek novels and stuff. Anyway, John M. Ford wrote an article in Role Player about healing. And there was one idea in there that I kind of took out, and I apply it when I play TNT or old school D&D, any of the retro clones, because I think it's a good rule. It adds some bookkeeping, and if you've listened to the show for any amount of time, you know I am not a fan of bookkeeping unless it adds enjoyment to the game. And I think this is one of the rare cases where more bookkeeping can lead to additional enjoyment. So let's talk about the two ideas. So like I said, the first article was from Judges Guild, and it was a little article section called Shock Recovery, where they gave 3 ideas for alternate rules for how to handle injuries. And the first one is the one I'm going to talk about. The other 2 were just ways to determine how long you would survive after you fell below 0 hit points, so your party could rescue you, which for the day and age that it was written is pretty good. I don't think the below 0 hit point rule came out until AD&D, right? It wasn't in Basic. It wasn't in OD&D. But the first rule was that immediately after a combat, you can roll to, when you bandage a character, that character will recover 1d4 hit points. Now, if you fast forward, this was what, 76, 77, so you fast forward 6 years or so, 7, 8 years, you know, when the Fantasy Trip and GURPS come out, this is pretty much the first aid skill before they had a first aid skill, right? But I allow this combined with the next rule. So let's talk about that rule. The second rule, this is the one by John M. Ford, says that every time you get wounded, Oh, I took 4 hit points. Oh, I took 3 hit points. Don't just take that off your total. Keep track of it. So instead of saying I took 4 hit points of damage, you say I acquired a 4 hit point wound, and then I acquired a 3 hit point wound. And then when those wounds exceed your hit point total, you're out. But, well, the original rule as written is then when you recover natural healing, each of those wounds recovers individually. So you're healing at a faster rate, right? Because if you have 3 wounds, you're potentially healing up to 3 hit points a day versus a normal 1 a day, which might be considered by some a little munchkin-y, but I like it. And I think it's more realistic, right? Because like if I have a cut here and a cut there, this one doesn't wait till this one's healed, right? They both heal at their own rate together. The other thing that makes this work is that it was a GURPS rule, and in GURPS you don't automatically heal every day. Every day of complete rest you get to make a health check, which in D&D would be a constitution check. If you pass that constitution check, you get your healing for that day. So the way this rule works is instead of rolling 1 health check for the day, you roll 1 health check for each wound. And so really, if you had 2 wounds and you have about 50-50 shot of each one healing, that's actually pretty much the standard of 1 a day, right? So that's, except you're usually going to have more than 1 wound, but whatever. But I also like this because minor wounds, it's a scratch. Those are going to heal relatively quickly. And those major wounds are going to be the ones that linger for a while. I like that. Like I said, I like to combine these 2 rules. And so immediately after a combat, if you're going to do first aid on another player, you don't do it just once. You do it once per wound. And stealing a rule from Savage Worlds, you only have so much time to do this before, it's too late to help that wound. So, yeah, so it's that first aid thing. And that's why in Judges Guild, they call it shock recovery, right? Because your initial damage, some of it's just the shock of the combat. And when that's over, that's going to heal relatively quickly. It's like when you're out on a run and you twist your ankle, you're like, oh, and you can't walk for, 5-10 minutes. But after that, you can walk. It's a temporary injury. But of course it lingers. We're not going to get into that. So the other thing I'm going to say about all this is that I think these rules would help make Jason happy. Jason is the host of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, and he always complains, or complained. Complain might be a strong word, but whatever. We're going with it. He always complains that he doesn't feel it's right that high-level characters take longer to heal than low-level characters. Now, I addressed this once in a feedback episode early on, like probably single-digit episodes. I don't think that's a big deal. I think that makes sense because they're trying to heal to supernatural levels, right? It's like when a pro sports player gets injured, it takes them longer to get back at that expert level than, some schmuck like me who gets injured to get back to the level where I was at. I think it works, but that's me. But I think using these rules helps allay that, and your high-level character is more likely to have more wounds, so they will heal quicker. So that's how I do it. That's, like I said, I do it in TNT, I do it in all the retro clones. So just to sum it all up, right after a combat, each wound gets a first aid check by a character doing first aid. If you're in a game with a skill system, use that first aid or that medic or whatever they call it skill. If you're in a system without one, just make an attribute check using intelligence or wisdom, whatever you think would be more appropriate for the player doing the first aid. If you have specialties, that's great. I would give a cleric a little bonus on that roll. I would give, in the classic class system, I would give clerics a bonus. I would probably give barbarians a bonus because first aid seems like a very barbarian thing to do when they're out in the wilderness and all that fun stuff and getting injured. They need to know how to take care of it because they're far away from civilization. You can make the argument for fighters because on the combat, they need to, on the battlefield, they need to do buddy care, as we call it these days. Yeah, so I wouldn't give it to magic users. Fighter and magic users. I wouldn't give it to thieves. But yeah, maybe give them a little bonus to their rolls, the classes I just talked about, whatever works in your campaign. But yeah, so immediately after combat, whoever's doing their first aid, one roll per wound that they're trying to heal. And then for ongoing care, for every day of rest, each wound the person that is injured, rolls a health check for. Health, if your game has health, constitution, if it has constitution. And if you make it, that wound heals. And I normally have special rules for crits and fumbles, right? If you fumble, not only doesn't it heal, it goes back, infection. If you make a crit, it heals twice, or I give you another roll, whatever. But that's me. So that's it. That is how I handle healing in both old school and new school games. Let me know what you think. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Yeah, whatever. Do you have a better way? Let me know that. Feedback at dekahedron.com. On YouTube, you can leave comments below. You can call the feedback line, which is 562-774-2278. That's 562-RPG-CAST. Or you can go to sayhi.chat/dekahedron. All those methods and more, they're in the show notes. That's it. Until next week, happy gaming, happy life. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Dekahedron RPG podcast. Please come back.